Hello, I'm Peter Nixon. I'm wearing my McGill University t-shirt today because I'm thinking of all the family members that worked and graduated from McGill Medicine and all the frontline workers in the medical community who are helping save our lives and risking their own at the same time during this pandemic. Dr. Palin has very kindly invited me to share some thoughts online for those of you who are interested. So this is a Zoom recording uh, from my studio in Hong Kong with the Petronas Towers in the background because I'm thinking of you in Malaysia and wish I was there with you, having all the good times that we've shared together before and that we will share together again. What is the story? The story starts, it's an 8-part story, 8 chapters, and it's really about change. When I started out in Canada, I was a young accountant. I had graduated from this family of doctors, and they kind of wanted me to become a doctor and join the family business and the family hospital. But I wasn't really very good around blood and didn't really want to get into that. But the chairman of the hospital that the family was connected to was a chartered accountant. So I thought, great, I will join PwC. Just like him, I'll article and become an accountant. Because when I graduated from business school, we were at the height of the recession in the early 80s, and I realized there were no jobs, so better to get a job was to become a professional. At that point, Montreal was changing from being Montreal, Canada's #1 city, to changing to become Canada's #2 or #3 city. So the world around me was changing a lot, but I figured, great, get a job, get out there, and get experience. That took me into a very interesting experience as an auditor. My goal was to figure out what made great companies great, what made great organizations great. And I thought that must be the numbers. So I studied the numbers and realized, no, that wasn't exactly the case. At the same time, the Quebec separatism issues were rearing their heads. The economy was failing. Opportunities for young people in that part of Canada at that time were not very good, especially if you were English speaking. So I decided, I looked around, the world was globalizing. Let's get an international secondment and get some experience. So I jumped into the international arena. I followed my firm to Asia via Switzerland. After a year in Geneva, I landed in Hong Kong. And I landed in Hong Kong just as China and the Asian tigers were all skyrocketing. Early 90s, everything was booming. And I decided what was really needed to make great companies great was not more accountants, the numbers. What was really making great organizations great was leadership. And so I accepted the offer to become their head of leadership and development. And that then allowed me to work with some great leadership developers and with them figure out exactly how to develop great leaders. Again, rapidly changing environment around me, lots of things happening. I decided I would need to do a deep dive to figure out how to do all of this better. I did a Master's of Science and Training, and I started recruiting leadership development experts on various topics from all over the world to work with our team at PwC. And I learned that leaders are not born, they're made, and there are core skills that they need to learn as their careers develop. And as we were doing that, the firm itself was growing from some 400 people when I joined in Hong Kong to well over 10,000 today. So huge, huge change. I did leave them. I decided to specialize and just focus on leadership development in the early mid-90s because they didn't want to do that as a service line, and I wanted to do that for my clients. So I chose to set up my own boutique, another big change. And I decided what was really needed for leaders that would make great organizations was their ability to dialogue, negotiate, and resolve conflict. Because in my experience working with multinationals as an auditor and then in leadership development, was that the great companies were the ones that had the great leaders, and the best leaders were those who could dialogue in those ambiguous situations. They could negotiate better outcomes and ultimately resolve the conflicts and the problems that stood in their way. So I decided to specialize in that. In the pre-97 situation of Hong Kong, lots of change happening with the world around us, and I set up my little business. And then that went very well for the next 20 years. Got to work with 600 companies around the world, went to Malaysia lots of times, went to some 60 countries around the world. And then the pandemic hits again, major change. Everything comes to a screeching halt. And I had to stop and think, okay, so now what? Now, what is it that will make great organizations? And I decided it was the same thing. It was their ability to dialogue, to show compassion, as leaders, to stand tall and look over the horizon and figure out where are we headed and how is all this change going to affect us? How can we keep ourselves from going bankrupt? How can we change our service and product lines to keep up with how the market is changing rapidly? How do we manage our cost base? All of that required strong leadership skills, dialogue, conflict resolution, and ultimately negotiation. So I moved the business online, and that allowed me then to figure out exactly what I'm doing now. How do we help you specialize and develop your leadership and your careers for this post-pandemic world? Well, one of the things we need to figure out is how is the post-pandemic world going to be different? And I imagine sitting with young people when I'm older than now, and maybe in 30 years' time, and they ask, Peter, what was the world like before the pandemic? And how did it change? And I think my captioned remarks will be, before the pandemic hit the world and caused us all to work from home and have a lockdown, we were all pretty much focused on me. How can I build my career? How can I build my assets? How can I make my family richer? How can I travel more? How can I build my company? How can I build my country? And after we realized that if one person gets sick somewhere, the whole world can get sick everywhere, we realized it's not about me anymore. It's about we. How can we live, all 7-8 billion of us on this planet, sustainably? How can we look after our Mother Earth? How can we look after our humblest, poorest neighbors? How can we help people realize their potential while others realize theirs? You know, how do we fuel the inevitable innovation and entrepreneurship that's so well rewarded under capitalism, but still look after the least educated and most impoverished people in the world? And that's what we needed to do. And hopefully 30 years from now, I'll be able to look back and say, we did that. We looked after each other and we looked after our earth. And I hope that will really work out, because we're not in a zero-sum game. We're in an optimal outcome game where we need to realize our potential while helping others realize theirs. So let me stop here, and I'll open it up to questions and look forward to hearing your thoughts. Take care and all of the best.